The restaurant had been rented out for the entire evening. Round tables dressed in ivory linen, candles floating in low glass bowls, a string duo playing something soft and European near the entrance. My daughter had always known how to make a room feel like a magazine page. I'll give her that. I arrived 15 minutes early the way I always do, force of habit from 30 years of shift work, and stood near the door holding the gift I had wrapped myself. Pale blue paper with a white ribbon, the kind she liked when she was small. The hostess checked her list and walked me to table 9. Not table 1, where my son-in-law's parents were already seated. Not table 3, where my daughter's college friends had gathered around a bottle of Prosecco. Table 9 was near the back, close to the kitchen door, next to a couple I didn't recognize who turned out to be her husband's co-workers from out of town. I set my purse down, smoothed the front of my blouse, and smiled at the strangers beside me. "The table card," said Margaret. "Just Margaret, no last name," like I was staff. I didn't say anything about it. The party had been planned by Beverly. That much was clear the moment I walked in. The floral arrangements were her taste. Tall, white orchids in narrow vases. Nothing warm about them. The menu was printed on cardstock with a gold border, the kind you order custom. My daughter had mentioned the party was casual, just dinner, when I'd asked back in February. What I was looking at was not casual. What I was looking at had cost someone a great deal of money, and it hadn't been me. Beverly was already holding court near the bar when I arrived, her silver hair pinned in a way that looked effortless and wasn't. She wore a deep green dress that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage used to. She laughed at something, touched the arm of whoever was listening, and somehow managed to make the whole room orbit around her without appearing to try. She saw me. She nodded. She went back to her conversation. I found my seat and ordered water. My daughter, Claire, turned 40 that evening. 40 years old. I remembered the morning she was born like it happened in another life, which in a way it had. A February blizzard, the hospital short-staffed, my husband Carl already pale and sick, though we hadn't known what it was yet. I held her under the fluorescent lights and thought, this is the only thing I've ever done that is completely and purely good. I raised her mostly alone after Carl died. She was 11, I was 34. I worked 2 jobs for the better part of a decade, waitressing nights at Harlan's Diner and bookkeeping mornings at a property management office downtown. I wore orthopedic shoes by the time I was 40 because I couldn't afford to have bad feet. I drove a car that overheated if you pushed it past 60. I packed Claire's lunches every single day until she left for college because school lunches cost money we didn't have. And I wanted her to eat something real. She got into a good school. Full ride? Almost. I covered the rest with what I'd scraped together in a savings account I'd been feeding since she was 3. She cried when the letter came. I stood in the kitchen doorway watching her. And the feeling inside my chest was something I still don't have a word for. Pride. Yes, but also something quieter. Something that said, okay, this is what it was for. She met her husband, Derek, in her 2nd year of grad school. He was kind enough, measured, the sort of man who always seemed to be calculating something just behind his eyes. His family had money, the old settled kind that doesn't need to announce itself. His mother, Beverly, was a retired federal judge. His father had founded an engineering firm that Derek now ran. They were, as my neighbor Dolores once put it, the kind of people who summer as a verb. I never fit into that world, and I never pretended I did. I wore department store clothes to holiday dinners. I brought casseroles to gatherings where caterers were already in the kitchen. I said the wrong things sometimes, used the wrong fork, laughed too loudly at a story. Beverly was never cruel to me directly. She was simply the kind of woman who made you feel the distance between you without ever having to name it. What I didn't expect was that Claire would eventually stop trying to close that distance, that she would simply begin to stand on Beverly's side of it. It happened slowly, the way a tide goes out. First, she stopped calling on Sunday evenings, our standing check-in since she'd moved away. Then the invitations thinned. A birthday dinner, just the 4 of them. A weekend trip I heard about afterward in passing. The previous Christmas, I had driven 6 hours to spend the holiday at their house, and Beverly was already there when I arrived, already settled into the guest suite, already on her second glass of wine with my daughter at the kitchen island. There was a small gift bag for me by the door with a candle inside, the kind you find near the checkout at home goods stores. No card. Claire had looked at me with something like apology, but she hadn't said anything. I drove 6 hours home the day after Christmas. 4 months before the birthday party, Claire called me on a Tuesday, not a Sunday. I should have noticed that. She sounded bright, casual, the voice she uses when she's already decided something and is delivering it rather than discussing it. Mom, Derek and I have been looking at expanding the catering side of the business. We found a kitchen space. It's perfect, but it needs some work. Maybe 40 or 50,000 total, but we're already covering most of it. We just need a little more to get through permits and equipment. I asked how much. If you could do 9,000, that would honestly be a lifesaver. 9,800 was what I had in my secondary account, the one I called my floor, the minimum I promised myself I'd never drop below. I'd been adding to it for years in small amounts, the leftover from a furnace repair that didn't cost as much as I'd budgeted, a tax refund one year, a small bonus from the office before I retired. I told her I'd think about it. She said that was fine, totally fine, but the permit window was closing. I transferred the money that Friday. I didn't tell her it was nearly everything I had there. I didn't want her to feel guilty. I told myself that's what mothers do. She sent a text that afternoon. You're the best. Truly. She didn't call. I heard nothing more about the kitchen expansion for months. When I asked in passing, she said it was still in progress. Permits took forever. She'd update me when there was news. There was never news. I stopped asking. And then came the birthday party. The one I learned about through a group text that included 15 other people. A text that said simply, "It's my big 4-0, and I want to celebrate with everyone I love. Saturday the 12th, 7 o'clock, Terrace at Ashwood, RSVP to Derek." I RSVP'd to Derek. He didn't reply. I bought a gift. A first edition of a book Claire had mentioned wanting years ago. The kind of small thing that takes actual listening to find. I had it wrapped. I drove 3 hours alone on a Saturday evening and sat at table 9 near the kitchen door and smiled at strangers who worked with my son-in-law. The party moved the way those things do. Champagne, small plates, the string duo playing just loud enough to fill the pauses. Beverly moved through the room like she'd organized it, which she had. She knew every table, every name, stopped to laugh and squeeze shoulders. My daughter floated beside her for most of the night, arm occasionally linked through Beverly's, comfortable and easy, the kind of ease that comes from years of practice. I got up once to use the restroom. When I came back, someone had moved my purse to make room for a dessert cart. And for a moment, I couldn't find my own seat. When it came time for the tribute, Derek stood up and asked for quiet. He spoke about his wife with the quiet confidence of a man who had never once doubted he deserved her. He talked about her brilliance, her grace, her capacity for love. He got a little emotional, just enough, and the room responded with warmth. Then Beverly stood. She had not been asked. She simply rose, smoothed her dress, and accepted the microphone from Derek like it had always been intended for her. She spoke for 6 minutes. I counted. She talked about watching Claire become the woman she was, about the trips they'd taken together, she and Claire, to Florence the previous spring, about the long phone calls and the recipes shared and the Sunday mornings spent walking Beverly's neighborhood while Derek slept in. She called Claire her daughter, not her daughter-in-law. Her daughter. She said, "I always wanted a girl, and the universe gave me the best one." The room exhaled with warmth. Several people wiped their eyes. Claire pressed her hand to her chest. I sat at table 9 with my water glass and felt something inside me go very, very still. It wasn't rage. I want to be clear about that. It was something more like recognition. A click of understanding so complete that it almost had a sound. So this is the shape of it, I thought. This is what has been happening for years, and now it is simply visible. Claire looked across the room then. Our eyes met for a moment. She gave me a small smile, the kind you give a neighbor, and looked away. I folded my napkin in my lap. I thought about the $9,800. I thought about the 6-hour Christmas drive. I thought about the blizzard in February, 1985, and the girl I held under fluorescent lights and believed was the purest thing I'd ever done. I thought about my father. He grew up in rural Tennessee with nothing, built a life through silence and patience and choices no one knew he was making. He died when Claire was in middle school and left behind a house, 2 modest investment accounts, and an envelope in his fireproof box addressed to me in his handwriting. Inside was a note that said only, "You always had more than you let on. Use it when it matters." I had not opened the second envelope in that box, the one from his attorney, for several years. I knew what was in it, roughly. I had chosen not to think about it because thinking about money made me think about all the things I'd told myself I couldn't afford, all the years I'd worn orthopedic shoes and driven overheating cars. Knowing the number felt dangerous somehow, like it might make me angry about the wrong things. But sitting at table 9, watching Beverly accept applause that should have been split at minimum, I thought, it might be time to open that envelope. I drove home the same night. I didn't wait for cake. I told Claire happy birthday, touched her arm, and handed her the book. She looked at it briefly and said, "Oh, vintage. How fun." She was already turning back toward the group when she said it. I walked to my car through the parking lot in the dark, heels quiet on the asphalt, and I did not cry until I was on the highway. And even then, it wasn't grief so much as relief, like pressure releasing from somewhere I hadn't known was sealed. My house was dark when I got home. I went straight to the back bedroom, the one I'd used as a sewing room since Carl died, and I opened the closet. On the top shelf, behind a box of Christmas ornaments and an old hat I'd meant to donate for years, was my father's fireproof box, olive green, dented at one corner. The key was in my jewelry dish on the dresser, on the same ring as a key to a car I no longer owned. I carried the box to the kitchen table and opened it under the overhead light. Everything was there. His accounts, the house deed for the property in Clarksville, the original mortgage documents stamped paid in full in red, the updated insurance papers, and, at the bottom, the letter from his attorney, outlining the trust he'd established in my name, quietly updated 3 years before he died. I had a rough sense of the number. The rough sense had been conservative. The house alone had appreciated considerably since the early 90s. The investment accounts, left to grow untouched while I told myself I'd deal with it later, had compounded into something that did not look like the daughter of a Tennessee farmer and a Walmart cashier. There was also a small parcel of land outside Clarksville that his attorney had suggested selling years ago, which I had ignored because I hadn't been ready to let go of anything that still had his name on it. I sat at my kitchen table until 2 in the morning with a yellow legal pad and a calculator and a cup of tea that went cold. Then I went to bed and slept better than I had in months. On Monday, I called Patricia Hensley, the estate attorney. My neighbor, Dolores, had recommended 2 years ago when Dolores updated her own will. I had her number in my phone, but had never used it. I made an appointment for Thursday. Patricia had a sharp face and reading glasses she wore on a chain and didn't waste time on pleasantries, which I appreciated. I spread my papers on her conference table and she looked through them methodically, making small notes in the margins of her notepad. "You've been sitting on this," she said. It wasn't a question. "I suppose I have. What do you want to do with it?" I had thought about this. For 3 nights, I had sat with it at the kitchen table and walked around the block with it and washed dishes with it, running through my mind. I knew what I wanted. I had known since I drove home on the highway, in the dark, with the headlights of other cars going past. I told Patricia I wanted to update everything. Remove Claire from the primary documents. Establish a small scholarship fund through the community college, where I'd taken an accounting class 20 years ago, for women returning to school, after raising children, and I wanted to make one purchase I had been putting off for 15 years. A small piece of land in the Smoky Mountains, where Carl and I had once talked about building something simple we never had. I wanted to do it now. Just a cabin, nothing grand. Somewhere that was only mine. Patricia wrote everything down. She did not offer an opinion, which I had not asked for. When I left her office, the afternoon light was low and gold across the parking lot, and I stood for a moment, with my keys in my hand, and felt the particular lightness that comes not from happiness exactly, but from making a decision that is entirely your own. Claire called 2 weeks later. Not about the birthday. She didn't mention the birthday. She called because Derek's parents were thinking of visiting, and she wanted to know if I would mind coming another weekend instead of the one I'd mentioned. I said that was fine. She seemed surprised by how easily I agreed. There was a small pause. "Are you okay, Mom?" "I'm well," I said. "How's the kitchen expansion coming?" Another pause. "It's moving. Slowly. Good. I hope it works out." She asked if I was sure I was okay. I said yes. I asked about the grandchildren. She told me a story about the younger one, a funny thing he'd said at breakfast, and for a few minutes, we were just two people talking. It was easy. It almost felt like before. After we hung up, I sat on my front porch and watched the street for a while. The neighbor's dog was barking at something in a hedge. A kid rode past on a bike too big for him, wobbling heroically. The evening was coming down warm and slow. I did not hate my daughter. I want to be clear about that too. What I felt was not hate, and it was not indifference. It was something I had to name carefully so I could carry it correctly. It was love with limits. Love that had finally stopped pretending limits were the same as failure. I had spent years shrinking myself to fit inside her life, turning down the volume of my own needs so they wouldn't inconvenience her. That was done now. Not out of anger, out of something that felt a great deal more like self-respect. The cabin in the mountains came together quicker than I expected. I had a contractor out by late spring. It was a modest thing. 2 bedrooms, a deep porch facing the ridge, wood floors, one good reading chair by a window. The kind of place you can breathe in. I bought it without mentioning it to anyone, which sounds stranger than it was. I had simply stopped explaining myself to people who had never thought to ask. I told Dolores, because Dolores would have found out anyway, and I trusted her completely. "Good Lord, Margaret," she said, when I showed her pictures on my phone. "You've been holding out. My father taught me to stay quiet and stay ready." She looked at me over her reading glasses. "How long have you been ready?" I thought about it. Longer than I knew. I drove up to see the cabin on a Saturday in June. Alone, which was how I'd wanted it. The road in was unpaved for the last 2 miles, and the trees closed in overhead in a way that felt like arriving somewhere, rather than passing through. I sat on the porch for most of the afternoon with a book I didn't read and coffee I let go cold, and the particular sound of that kind of silence, insects and birdsong, and the occasional far-off something, wind or water, that you can't quite name. Carl would have loved it. I let myself sit with that for a while, not sadly, just truthfully. 3 weeks after I signed the cabin paperwork, Claire called again. A different call. Her voice had a quality I recognized from when she was a teenager and had done something she wasn't sure how to account for. Careful, slightly too casual. "Derek's mom mentioned running into Patricia Hensley at a fundraiser," she said. "Patricia mentioned she'd done some estate work recently. Small town. You know how it is." I didn't say anything. "Mom, did you change your will?" I updated some things. "Yes." A long pause. "Can I ask what that means?" "It means I made the arrangements that felt right to me at this point in my life." "Are you upset with me because of the party?" "I know you were at a different table. That was a seating thing. It wasn't meant to." "Claire." My voice was even. I had practiced being even about this, not because I was suppressing something, but because I actually felt even. "I'm not upset. I've been doing a lot of thinking." And I made some decisions. That's all. You should have told me. You didn't tell me about Florence. Silence. I didn't know you knew about Florence. You mentioned it in December. You said it was beautiful. Another long pause, this one different, softer. Mom, she stopped. I could hear her breathing. I think I've been doing some things that weren't fair to you. I let her sit with that for a moment. Not unkindly, just without rushing to fill the space. I think you have, I said. But this isn't punishment, sweetheart. I'm not doing this to hurt you. I'm just finally doing what I should have been doing for a long time. What's that? Treating myself like someone worth taking care of. She cried a little then. I let her. I didn't apologize, and I didn't comfort her past a certain point, because what she was feeling wasn't my fault, and stepping in to fix it would only restart the old pattern. She had to feel it. That was the only honest thing. We talked for almost an hour. It was the longest real conversation we'd had in years. She asked things she'd never asked before. About how I'd managed after her father died. About my father and what he'd actually left behind. About what I did in the evenings, what I cooked, whether I was lonely. Small questions, but they meant something. The act of asking. I answered honestly. I didn't make it easy or difficult. I just told the truth. Before we hung up, she said, I want to come visit. Just me. No Derek. No kids for a weekend. Just us. Can I do that? You can, I said. I'm sorry, Mom. I've been. She took a breath. I think I got a little lost. I know. I watched it happen. Why didn't you say something? I thought about that for a moment. The years of folded napkins and table 9 and casseroles taken to catered kitchens. The $9,800 transferred quietly on a Friday. Because I kept hoping you'd find your way back on your own, I said. And I think maybe now you are. She came the following month. Just her, just a weekend, like she'd said. She arrived Friday evening with a bottle of wine and her old overnight bag, the canvas one she'd had since college. And we sat on my porch until midnight, talking the way we used to talk, before Derek, before Beverly, before the growing distance had settled into something neither of us named. She cried again when I showed her the picture of the cabin. She recognized the mountains. That's where you and Dad used to talk about going, she said. Yes. She looked at the photo for a long time. You actually did it. I actually did it. I watched her face work through something. Grief, maybe, or something adjacent to it. The particular feeling of realizing you've been absent from someone's life during a time when things were happening. Tell me everything, she said. So I did. I told her about Patricia and the paperwork and the land in Clarksville and the drive up through the trees on the unpaved road and the afternoon on the porch when I sat and thought about her father and felt, for the first time in a long time, like myself, the whole version of myself, not the trimmed-down version I'd been carrying around for years, quiet and shrunk and apologetic about taking up space. She listened all the way through. She didn't check her phone. When I finished, she said, I want to see it. The cabin. Will you take me sometime? Whenever you want. There was something unclenching between us. I could feel it. The slow release of years of tension that had been so familiar, it had started to feel like the natural shape of things. It wasn't. This was closer to the natural shape. Two people who had always loved each other, learning again how to say so. I did not pretend the wound wasn't there. I didn't paper over the years of table 9 and unreturned calls and a birthday gift opened like a receipt. But I also didn't need to hold it in front of her like evidence. The accounting had already been done, quietly, in a lawyer's office, and the decisions made from it were mine. That was enough. Beverly called once. I don't know how she got my number, or whether Claire had given it to her. She was cordial, the way she is always cordial, and said something about hoping there hadn't been any misunderstanding at the party, that she'd always had great regard for me. I thanked her. I said the party had been beautiful. I said I hoped she was well. I didn't offer anything more, and I didn't need to. Some doors don't need to be slammed. You can simply stop walking through them. What I know now, at 63, that I did not know at 34, is this: the sacrifices we make for the people we love are worth making. But they are not down payments. They are not collateral. They are not bargaining chips we get to redeem later for a seat at a better table. And when we make them believing they are, we set ourselves up for a kind of grief that has no name. The grief of a debt that was never actually owed. My father knew this. He put it away quietly and waited until it was useful. He didn't trumpet it. He didn't threaten. He just stayed ready. The cabin is finished now. There's a reading chair on the porch that faces the ridge, an old quilt on the back of it, a small table for coffee. I've been up 3 times. I went alone the first 2 times. The third time Claire came with me, and we hiked an easy trail in the morning and made soup from scratch in the afternoon. The same chicken soup I used to make when she was sick as a child, and she asked me to write down the recipe, which she never had before. We didn't talk about Beverly. We didn't talk about the party. We talked about her kids and my plans for a fall garden and a book she was reading and whether the creek near the trail was actually deep enough to swim in summer. We talked the way people talk when they are not performing anything for each other. At one point, she looked over at me from the kitchen doorway, her hands still floury from the bread we'd made, and she said, "Mom, I'm glad you're happy." I thought about everything that sentence contained. All the years it hadn't been said. All the years I hadn't expected it. And the cabin around us, the one I'd finally built, the one that was only mine. "I'm glad too," I said. And I meant it without reservation, without the old asterisk, without the quiet brace for disappointment that had lived inside that particular phrase for longer than I wanted to count. Just those 3 words, clean and complete, standing exactly where they were supposed to. I am glad. I finally am.